At my son's funeral, my daughter-in-law said, "Stop crying. Pack your bags and get out now." So, at my son's funeral, I stood silently as Victoria gave orders like a queen mourning her loss. But here's what she didn't know. The house she was about to throw me out of, I built it with my own two hands back in 1987. And the money she thought she inherited, $850,000, was always mine. For 8 long years, she lived off my generosity, all while treating me like a burden. But instead of arguing, I walked away. Because sometimes silence is the most powerful response of all. Let me take you back to where it began. When my son David died in that car accident 2 months ago, Victoria took control of everything. "Don't worry about the arrangements, Tom," she said. "I'll handle everything." What she really meant was, stay out of my way. At the funeral home, she made every decision, the casket, the flowers, even the music. When I suggested David's favorite song, the one we used to play while building this very house, she cut me off. "That's too depressing," she said. "We need something more uplifting." I watched her command the room in her $300 black dress, orchestrating every detail like the director of a tragic play. And me? I sat quietly in my old gray suit, the same one I wore to my wife's funeral, feeling invisible in my own family story. The next sign came at the reception. Our home, my home, was filled with guests. Victoria pulled me aside in the kitchen and said, "Tom, we need to talk about your situation." "My situation?" I asked. "You're financially dependent on us now. David was supporting you, and with him gone," she shrugged. "I can't carry that burden." That word, burden, hit harder than she knew. She continued, "I've been generous letting you stay here, but this house is mine now. David left it all to me." I nodded slowly. Victoria mistook my silence for surrender. But she had no idea what that nod really meant. She didn't know that David never owned this house. He only lived here. And she definitely didn't know about the filing cabinet in the basement. 4 drawers of carefully organized financial records going back 40 years. Or about the trust. But we'll get to that soon enough. At the funeral, people saw what Victoria wanted them to see, a confident widow handling a family tragedy. And they saw me as the helpless old man who couldn't manage on his own. I heard her whisper to our neighbor, "Tom's having a hard time adjusting. The poor man doesn't understand finances. David handled everything for him." Helen Davis, my neighbor for 37 years, looked at me with pity. Even she believed Victoria's version of reality. That's when it hit me. People only see what they expect to see. Victoria saw an old man, quiet and broken. She mistook humility for helplessness, silence for weakness, and generosity for desperation. It was an understandable mistake. I'd spent the last 2 years living simply after losing my wife, Margaret. No fancy car, no expensive suits, just peace and reflection. David respected that. Victoria didn't. She measured worth by appearances, by volume, by who controlled the room. But she was about to learn that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who doesn't need to prove anything. As the last guest left that night, she cornered me by the door. "I meant what I said, Tom. This arrangement isn't working anymore." I looked around the living room I'd painted 3 times over the years. The hardwood floors I'd installed myself. The crown molding David and I measured when he was just 12. "I understand," I said quietly. But she had no idea what I really understood, and no clue what was coming next. The 3rd document in that drawer was the most important one. The original deed, dated March 15th, 1987. Owner, Thomas Mitchell. No co-signer. No joint ownership. No mortgage. I had paid cash for everything. Victoria, of course, had no idea. In 1987, she was 4 years old, probably learning to tie her shoes while I was learning to read blueprints. But the folder held more than just a deed. Insurance policies, property tax receipts, utility agreements, all in my name. All proving continuous ownership for 37 years. David's name didn't appear on a single document. The next drawer, the 1990s, told the same story. Taxes, insurance, maintenance, all paid by Thomas Mitchell. The 2000s? The same. The 2010s? Still me. Even the most recent file from 2024 carried only my name. And then, I found it. A folder tucked deep in the back of the bottom drawer, labeled Trust Documents, Private. This was the one Victoria had no clue existed. Inside were papers that could change everything, documents that told a story she never imagined. The first was a trust agreement, dated June 15th, 1985, 2 years before David was even born. The Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. The second was a bank statement from the First National Bank of Ohio. Current balance, as of October 31st, 2024, $853,412. The third paper was a list of beneficiaries. David's name was there, but not as an heir. He was listed as a lifetime beneficiary, bound by specific terms and conditions. Conditions Victoria never once asked about. The trust itself was complex, but the idea was simple. Margaret and I had created it together. After her death, I became the sole trustee. David received monthly allowances for education, housing, family support, but the ownership always stayed with the trust, which meant it stayed with me. David lived well because I made sure he lived well. The degree I helped him earn, the wedding I helped fund, every investment and opportunity all came from this trust, and all remained under my control. But Victoria? She saw David's comfortable lifestyle and assumed he was wealthy. She saw his generosity toward me and thought it came from his own success. She never realized that the money flowing from David to me was actually my money flowing back home. It's funny how assumptions work. You see what fits your story and ignore what doesn't. Victoria expected that successful young couples take care of aging parents. So when she saw David helping me, she assumed I depended on him. She never considered that it was the other way around. Then I found one last document, the one that would matter most when the time came for truth to surface. David's life insurance policy, $150,000, just like Victoria said, but the beneficiary wasn't her. It was the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust, which meant me. Victoria had been spending money that was never hers, planning a future built on foundations that didn't exist, dreaming of an empire made of smoke. I closed the filing cabinet, locked it, and went upstairs. In the kitchen, I made myself a sandwich and thought about timing. She'd given me until November 15th to move out. It was November 1st, 2 weeks exactly. I could call her right now, show her the truth, watch her entire illusion collapse in one afternoon. Or I could wait, let her keep talking, let her keep digging, because the deeper she dug, the harder she'd fall. My old business partner used to say, "Tom, the best negotiation strategy is letting the other person talk themselves into a corner." Victoria was already doing that beautifully. The only question was how far I wanted to let her go. I looked around the kitchen, the same one I designed 37 years ago. The cabinets I'd chosen, the counters I'd installed, the windows I'd order myself. My house, my trust, my choice. Victoria was about to learn a hard truth. Respect isn't something you're given. It's something you earn. And when you take it for granted, life has a way of teaching you a painful lesson. That lesson came sooner than she expected. Sunday morning, I was getting ready for church when I heard voices downstairs. Victoria had arrived, and she wasn't alone. 3 of her real estate agent friends were with her. I heard her before I saw her. "This place has incredible bones," she said loudly. "But the decor is so outdated. Classic old person style." They walked through my house like it was already theirs. "Oh my God, Victoria, this crown molding is gorgeous," one of them said. "Original," Victoria replied proudly. "From 1987. Tom built this place, but he has no eye for modern design." I stood at the top of the stairs, listening as they dissected my life's work like it was inventory for an estate sale. "The bones are great," another woman said, "but you'll have to get the kitchen." "Already planning on it," Victoria replied. "Tom will be moving to a senior community soon. I'll have full control over renovations. Full control over my kitchen. The one Margaret and I had designed together after 6 months of planning." I walked downstairs in my church clothes. 3 strangers were standing in my living room, taking photos. "Tom," Victoria said, her voice bright and fake. "Perfect timing. I want you to meet some colleagues." She introduced me like I was part of the house she was selling. "This is Tom, David's father. He's the original owner, but he's transitioning to a more suitable living situation. Transitioning? Like I was being downsized. Mr. Mitchell, said the blonde one, your house has such character. You must have put a lot of work into it. Some, I said. Victoria tells us you're moving to Sunset Manor. That's such a nice facility. I looked at Victoria. Is that what I'm doing? We discussed this, Tom, she said sharply. November 15th, remember? I remember you discussing it, I replied. The room fell silent. The agents exchanged uneasy glances. Well, one said awkwardly, we should probably let you get to church. But Victoria wasn't finished embarrassing herself. Tom, while everyone's here, maybe you could tell them about the maintenance issues, the roof leak, the furnace problems? There's no roof leak, I said evenly. And the furnace is 2 years old. Tom, she said with that patronizing tone, you know the upstairs faucet drips and the basement gets damp in spring. The faucet needs a 50-cent washer, I said. The basement's been dry for 20 years. Victoria's smile tightened. Tom's very attached to this place, she said to her friends. Sometimes he doesn't see problems that are obvious to others. Problems like what? I asked. Like the fact that you can't afford to maintain a house this size anymore. The room went silent again. Even her friends looked uncomfortable. Can't afford it? I repeated. Tom, we've been through this. Your Social Security barely covers basic expenses. And you know this how? Because I'm not blind, she said coldly. You drive a 15-year-old Honda. You shop with coupons. You haven't updated anything since the 90s. One of the agents cleared her throat. Maybe we should. No, it's fine, Victoria interrupted. Tom understands. He's had 2 years to adjust to reality since Margaret died. I looked her straight in the eye. And what reality is that? That you're a 70-year-old man on a fixed income who can't handle a 2,400 square foot house anymore. 70? I'm 68, I said quietly. But go on. The point is, she said, you've been living off David's generosity for years. And now that he's gone, you need to face reality. Her words lingered like poison in the air. The real estate agents didn't know where to look. David's generosity, I repeated slowly. He paid my property taxes, my utilities, my groceries. Yes, she snapped. I saw him write the checks. I stepped closer. Did you ever see him write a check to the county for property taxes? Her mouth opened, but no words came out. At my son's funeral, my daughter-in-law said, stop crying, pack your bags and get out now, He handled those things online, she said. I looked at her calmly. Did you ever see him pay my electric bill? He transferred money to your account. Did you ever see any bank statements showing those transfers? Her confidence faltered for just a moment. We kept our finances separate, she said, but I know what I saw. So, you never actually saw any of these payments, I said. The blonde agent stepped forward awkwardly. You know what, Victoria? This feels like a family matter. Maybe we should give you two some privacy. But Victoria wasn't done. No, she snapped. This needs to be said. Tom, you can't keep living in denial about your situation. I raised an eyebrow. What denial? The denial that you're anything other than a burden. The word hit the air like a slap. Even she looked startled that it had come out of her mouth. A burden? I said quietly. I'm sorry, she said, though she didn't sound it. But yes, you've been one since Margaret died. David was too kind to admit it, but someone had to. Too kind to admit what? That supporting you was bankrupting him. I blinked. Bankrupting him? Yes, she said, her voice rising with every word. Do you have any idea what it costs to keep this place running? Property taxes alone are $8,000 a year. Add utilities, maintenance, your medical bills. David spent at least $40,000 last year keeping you afloat. And now he's gone, and I'm the one left to clean up the mess. The real estate agents were edging toward the door, uncomfortable witnesses to a conversation they never signed up for. So you're throwing me out, I said. I'm giving you a month to find appropriate housing, she said sharply. That's more generous than most would be. Generous. I let the word hang in the air. Yes, Tom, generous. Because, frankly, you never contributed anything to David's success. He built his life on his own, earned his money, bought his own house. This house. Yes, David inherited it from Margaret, and now I inherit it from him. That's how inheritance works. I nodded slowly. I see. Good. Finally. Victoria, I said softly, you might want to check your facts before making claims like that in front of witnesses. She gave a short, nervous laugh. What facts, Tom? I'm a real estate professional. I know how ownership works. Do you? I asked. Better than I do, apparently. The three agents stood frozen near the door, caught between politeness and panic. Ladies, I said, before you start planning renovations, you might want to ask Victoria to show you the deed to this house. Her face drained of color. Tom, don't. Don't what? I asked. Don't tell the truth? I'd said enough. Sometimes the best revenge is silence, letting people bury themselves with their own arrogance. Enjoy your tour, I said, and walked out the front door. I had a lawyer to call. Monday morning, I sat in attorney Margaret Collins' office, 3 manila folders laid neatly between us on her mahogany desk. She'd been handling my affairs for 20 years. She knew exactly what those folders contained. Tom, she said, adjusting her glasses, are you sure you want to go through with this? Once we start, there's no turning back. Victoria will know everything. Good, I said. It's time she did. Margaret opened the first folder. The original deed to 447 Maple Street. Recorded March 15th, 1987. Sole owner, Thomas Mitchell. No co-signers. No joint ownership. No mortgage. Correct. The second folder, property tax records for 37 years. All paid by you, from your accounts. Correct. She nodded. Insurance policies, utilities, maintenance contracts, all in your name. Correct again. Then she opened the third folder, the one that mattered most. The Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust, she said. The papers were thick, layered with decades of signatures and careful planning. Current balance? $853,412 as of last Friday. And David's status? Beneficiary during his lifetime, I said. Never a trustee, never an owner. Margaret leaned back. Tom, this is a substantial estate. Victoria had no idea. None, I said. And David never told her. He wasn't careless, just not detail-oriented. He knew I helped him when he needed it. He probably never thought to explain where the money came from. So Victoria assumed David was supporting you, instead of the other way around. I gave a small, tired smile. Exactly. Margaret sighed. The irony is poetic, isn't it? She's been trying to throw me out of my own house, using my own money to do it. How so? David's life insurance, $150,000. She's been making plans with that money for 2 months. Margaret's brow furrowed. But the beneficiary is the trust, I said, which means it's mine. She pulled out a calculator and did the math. So she thinks she inherited a $420,000 house and $150,000 in insurance. That's right. But in reality, she inherited nothing. Margaret looked at me for a long moment. She's been treating you like a charity case while trying to spend nearly $600,000 that isn't hers. That's right. She was quiet for a moment. Then why let this go on for 2 months, Tom? Why not correct her immediately? I looked out the window, remembering that Sunday morning. Her voice sharp and cruel, calling me a burden in my own living room. Because, I said, I wanted to see how far she'd go. And she went pretty far. Margaret nodded slowly. All right, what do you want to do now? I want to establish boundaries, I said. Legal ones and personal ones. She picked up her pen. Go on. First, process the insurance claim immediately. That money belongs to the trust. Done. Second, serve Victoria with a formal notice. She's a tenant in my house, not an owner. How much notice? 30 days, I said. The same time frame she gave me. Margaret smiled faintly. Poetic justice. Third, I said, she needs to understand exactly what David's relationship to the trust was. No more assumptions, no more lies. That could be arranged. Full documentation. And fourth, I paused. I want witnesses present when we have this conversation. Witnesses, the same real estate agents who heard her call me a burden. Margaret frowned. That sounds like public humiliation. No, I said quietly. Public humiliation is what she did to me. This is public education. There's a difference. She studied me for a long moment. That might be fair. Those women heard her story. They should hear the truth. Exactly. She jotted a few final notes. When do you want to do this? Tomorrow, I said, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the quiet calm of a man about to reclaim his name. Give Victoria 24 hours to enjoy her assumptions, I said, and if she refuses to meet, we serve the papers without explanation. Let her figure it out. Margaret nodded and pulled out her calendar. I can have everything ready by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Perfect. We'll meet at her real estate office, I said. Let her colleagues see what respect actually looks like. Margaret looked up from her notes. Tom, I've been practicing law for 30 years. I've seen every kind of family dispute. This isn't about the money, is it? I shook my head. No, it's about disrespect. It's about boundaries. Victoria needs to learn you can't treat people like they're powerless just because you think they are. If she'd shown an ounce of respect from the start, I would have handled this differently, quietly, privately. I would have helped her become independent. I paused, my voice tightening. But she wasn't respectful. She was cruel. And there's a difference between grief and cruelty. Margaret closed the folders and exhaled. I'll make the calls this afternoon. Then, after a moment, she added softly, For what it's worth, Tom, I think David would be proud of how you're handling this. I stood and shook her hand. David taught me something important. What's that? That quiet strength beats loud ignorance every time. She smiled. He was a smart boy. He learned from the best teacher, I said. Margaret? No, I replied. Life. Life taught him that respect is earned, not inherited. As I left her office, I thought about Victoria's deadline. She'd given me until November 15th to move out. Tomorrow was November 5th. She was about to learn that some deadlines cut both ways, and that assumptions often cost more than anyone can afford to pay. The quiet man was about to speak. And when quiet men finally speak, smart people listen. Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. Margaret Collins and I walked into Premier Realty on Main Street. Victoria was at her desk, smiling politely at a young couple as she scrolled through home listings. When she looked up and saw us, her smile faded. Confusion flickered across her face, followed by something closer to fear. Tom, she said, forcing a professional tone. What are you doing here? We need to talk, I said calmly. Privately. The couple glanced between us, sensing tension. I'm with clients right now, Victoria said, her composure stiffening. Can this wait? No, Margaret said, stepping forward. I'm Margaret Collins, attorney at law. We need to discuss urgent legal matters regarding your late husband's estate. The words attorney and legal matters changed the air instantly. The young couple exchanged uneasy looks. Maybe we should reschedule, the husband said quietly. Victoria's smile tightened. No, that's fine. Tom, please wait in the conference room. I'll be there in a minute. Actually, Margaret said, I think your colleagues should hear this too. Victoria froze. My colleagues? Yes. The three ladies from Sunday. I believe they're already making renovation plans based on some assumptions that need to be corrected. Around the office, conversations began to slow. Agent stopped pretending to type and started listening. Tom, Victoria said sharply, what is this about? It's about the house, I said simply. We already discussed the house. No, I replied. You discussed the house. I listened. The young couple stood awkwardly, then began inching toward the door. We'll call to reschedule, the wife murmured before they slipped out. Victoria, a familiar voice asked. The blonde agent from Sunday, Jessica, approached carefully. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, Victoria said tightly. Tom's just having some trouble accepting his new living situation. Actually, Margaret said, opening her briefcase, Tom's having trouble accepting his old living situation. Victoria frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Margaret said, pulling out the first folder, we need to clarify some serious misconceptions about property ownership. There are no misconceptions, Victoria said. I inherited David's house. What house would that be? Margaret asked. 447 Maple Street. And you have documentation of that inheritance? David's will, perhaps. Yes, Victoria said quickly. His car, his clothes, his personal effects, and the house. Margaret's voice stayed calm. David didn't own a house. The words hit the room like glass breaking. Every conversation stopped. What do you mean? He didn't own a house. Victoria demanded. Margaret opened the folder and laid a document on the table. 447 Maple Street is owned by Thomas Mitchell. Purchased March 15, 1987. No co-signers. No joint ownership. No mortgage. That's impossible. Here's the deed. Victoria snatched the paper and scanned it. Her face drained of color. This has to be wrong. David inherited the house when Margaret died. Margaret Mitchell owned no property. Margaret Collins replied evenly. Everything was purchased by Thomas Mitchell before their marriage. David lived there his entire life, as Tom's son in Tom's house. Jessica and the other agents were edging closer now, unable to look away. I don't understand, Victoria said. David paid all the bills. The taxes, the utilities, everything. No, I said quietly. David helped me around the house. I paid all the bills. That's not true. Margaret opened another folder. Property tax records for 37 years, she said, laying them out. All paid by Thomas Mitchell. Insurance policies, utility bills, bank records, maintenance contracts, all in his name. Victoria stared at the documents like they were written in another language. This doesn't make sense. David had money, good money. He was an engineer. David was comfortable, Margaret said, because Tom made sure he was comfortable. What are you talking about? Margaret opened the third folder. The Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust, she said. Current balance, $853,412. The office fell completely silent. David was a beneficiary of the trust during his lifetime, she continued. Tom supported his education, his wedding, his family, all from this trust. You're saying Tom was supporting David? I'm saying Tom was supporting his son, Margaret replied, with his own money. Victoria slumped into her chair. But David told me he was helping Tom financially. He was, I said, with groceries, with errands, with company. I help him with everything else. The life insurance, Victoria said suddenly, her voice cracking. David's life insurance, that's mine. Margaret pulled out another document. The beneficiary of David's life insurance policy, she said, is the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. No. Yes. That money is mine. That money, Margaret said firmly, belongs to Tom. Victoria looked around the office, her face pale and trembling. Every eye was on her. The same people who, just days earlier, had watched her belittle me in my own home. The woman who once spoke with confidence, who mocked an old man for being a burden, now sat surrounded by silence, staring at the truth she'd refused to see. Tom, she said finally, her voice small and trembling, I didn't know. I met her eyes calmly. You didn't ask. You could have told me, she whispered. You could have asked respectfully, I replied. Margaret closed the folders and spoke in her firm, measured tone. Victoria, you have 30 days to find alternative housing arrangements, the same timeline you gave Tom. 30 days, she repeated, stunned. But where will I go? That's not Tom's concern anymore, Margaret said coldly. You're a capable adult with a career. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Victoria looked at me again, but this time there was something different in her eyes. Not pride, not anger, respect. Tom, I'm sorry, she said quietly. I made assumptions. Yes, you did. Can we work something out? Some kind of arrangement. I looked around the office, the same office where she once humiliated me, and thought for a moment. Then I said evenly, Victoria, respect isn't negotiable. It never was. She nodded slowly. I understand that now. Good, I said. That's the first step toward earning it back. Margaret, and I turned to leave. Tom, Victoria called after me. What happens now? I paused at the door and looked back at her one last time. Now you learn what I've always known. What's that? She asked softly. That quiet people aren't weak people. We're just selective about when we use our voices. And with that, we walked out. The silence we left behind spoke louder than any argument ever could. By Thursday morning, the story had spread across Cleveland's real estate circles like wildfire. I didn't hear it from gossip or social media. I heard it from Helen Davis, my neighbor of 37 years, who showed up with coffee and the latest headlines. Tom, you should have seen Victoria at the grocery store yesterday, Helen said, settling into Margaret's old chair at my kitchen table. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. How so? I asked. Well, for starters, she was shopping in the clearance section, Helen said, lowering her voice. Victoria, who never bought anything unless it had a designer label. I raised an eyebrow. Maybe she's just being practical. Helen stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Maybe, but she was alone. Usually, she's surrounded by her real estate friends like some kind of celebrity. My guess? They're keeping their distance now that the truth's out. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. You know what people are saying? She continued. That she treated you like a charity case while planning to spend money that was never hers. I sighed. People love stories that prove their point. Helen shook her head. No, Tom. They're saying she showed poor judgment. That she made financial assumptions without doing her homework. And in real estate, homework matters. That made me smile faintly. You're right about that. Her broker even called her in for a meeting yesterday, Helen added. That caught my attention. How do you know? Because my sister's daughter works at Premier Realty, she said proudly. The whole office was buzzing after what happened Tuesday morning. Apparently, 3 different clients have already asked to be reassigned to other agents. Why? Helen leaned in. Because if Victoria can't figure out who owns the house she's been living in for 8 years, how can anyone trust her to handle their real estate transactions? I hadn't thought of it that way, but it made sense. In her line of work, credibility was everything, and she just lost hers publicly. There's more, Helen said, eyes glinting. Remember that young couple she was showing houses to when you arrived? Vaguely, I said. They posted about it on social media. So they dodged a bullet working with an agent who doesn't understand property law. They even included photos of the office. It's gone viral, hundreds of likes. The ripple effect was spreading faster than I could have imagined. Just then, my phone rang. It was Margaret Collins. Tom, she said briskly, we have some developments. Good or bad? Depends on how you look at it. Victoria has hired an attorney. I almost laughed. Of course she did. What's he after? He wants to discuss a settlement, Margaret replied. What kind of settlement? She'd like to stay in the house for 6 months instead of 30 days. She's offering to pay rent. How much? $2,000 a month. I couldn't help but chuckle. For a $420,000 property, market rent would be at least $3,000. There was a pause on the line. Margaret finally said, I thought you'd say that. Yes. What did you tell him? I asked. That we'd consider reasonable offers, Margaret said. And what's reasonable? $3,500 a month, she replied. First and last month in advance, plus a security deposit equal to 1 month's rent. I did the math in my head. So $10,500 up front. Correct. If she wants to stay, she pays market rate like any other tenant. Can she afford that? That's not our problem, Margaret said simply, though her attorney seemed to think it might be challenging given her current situation. After I hung up, Helen was watching me closely. Victoria wants to stay? She asked. She wants to stay, I said, but she wants to pay below market rent. And you told her? I told her she can pay market rent like anyone else. Helen nodded approvingly. Fair is fair. Friday afternoon brought another visitor, Mike Thompson, one of David's old college friends. He stood at my front door, looking uneasy. Tom, I owe you an apology. For what? For believing Victoria's version of things. I raised an eyebrow. And what version was that? She told everyone that David was supporting you financially, he said, and I believed her. I gave a small, understanding smile. And now, I'm sorry. I should have known better. David always talked about how proud he was of you, how you built this house, managed your investments, taught him about financial responsibility. So, why did you believe her? I asked. Mike looked down. Because it fit the picture I expected to see. An old man, a dead wife, a grown son helping out. It seemed natural. Assumptions, I said quietly. He nodded. Yeah, and I'm not the only one. A lot of David's friends made the same assumption. And now we all feel pretty stupid. We're wondering what else Victoria might have misrepresented about him. That caught my attention. Victoria's credibility wasn't just collapsing in business. It was unraveling across every social circle she had. By Saturday morning, Margaret called again. "Tom, final update," she said. "Victoria's attorney called back. And she can't afford the rent. She's moving out." I exhaled slowly. "I see. There's something else," Margaret added. "She's also leaving Premier Realty. Let's just say it was a mutual agreement." So, in the span of 1 week, Victoria lost her house and her job. "Tom," Margaret asked quietly, "do you feel bad about any of this?" I looked around my kitchen, the same one Margaret and I designed together. The one Victoria once planned to gut and remodel. "Margaret," I said, "Victoria made choices. She chose to be cruel instead of kind. She chose assumptions over questions. She chose to humiliate me in front of strangers." I paused, then continued. "Now she's facing the consequences. I didn't take her job. Her clients did that when they lost confidence in her judgment." Margaret nodded. "Exactly. This isn't revenge." "No," I said. "It's accountability. And Victoria's learning that actions have consequences. It's a lesson she should have learned long ago." Sunday morning, I sat in church thinking about forgiveness and boundaries. They weren't opposites. They were companions. I realized I could forgive Victoria for her assumptions and still maintain my boundaries. I could forgive her cruelty and still let her face the natural outcome of her choices. Forgiveness didn't mean pretending nothing happened. It meant accepting what happened and moving forward with wisdom. Victoria was moving out next weekend, and I was moving forward with a new understanding of my own quiet power. Sometimes the best lesson you can teach someone is to let them teach themselves. 3 weeks later, I was reading the Sunday paper when the doorbell rang. Victoria stood on my porch, holding a small moving box. "Hi, Tom." "Victoria, I found some things that belong to you," she said. Photo albums from when David was little. Some of Margaret's recipe cards.